So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a big pleasure to be in front of you and to participate in second infrastructure summit here in Riga this time. Actually, thank you, Girts. You did already half of my job. You more or less presented our panelists. So I will maybe not present them in the very detailed way, but at least to mention that we have really distinguished guests from different institutions, and we will be able to hear the outlook from different investors, starting from international like NEFCO, EBRD, and European Investment Bank, and also to hear the local views from Yanis, SEB, and from me. So maybe firstly also to say one more time thank you for Šarūnas and for Baltic for bringing people which are interested in infrastructure project all together from different audiences, starting from public institutions, policymakers, these who are implementing, from governmental agencies, finalizing by us as investors. And you know, our topic, political risk, when we looking from investors' perspective, I believe it's in each of our how to say pipeline and daily work when we facing it in one or another way. But when we coming together and trying to think how to discuss this topic, then we have some kind of challenges and issues also for ourselves, that you know it's quite a sensitive topic to discuss political risk and to recognize them and to talk about them. So at least what I believe and I hope that all we together during our panel discussion will be able to be as much as possible concrete, as much as possible to give some suggestions, proposals, solution, how to mitigate political risks and what would help for countries to attract more investments from local or institutional investors into infrastructure projects. So finalizing my starting points. So from investment point of view, we see that, you know, the political landscape is changing everywhere. And starting from, you know, US, Brexit, Italy, and ending even here closely to Sweden, Lithuania, and what Girts just mentioned about the elections in Latvia last week. So what we see during these political changes is that, you know, the traditional political movements, political parties are a little bit disappearing, or at least facing some kind of issues to survive, and new type of politicians appear, which again brings some kind of extra risk on the table. And you know, looking from infrastructure project perspective, I believe this long-term view it's very important for all of us as investors. So how to mitigate it, how to manage it, I believe now we could start the discussion. And first of all, I would like to go, Kari, to you, as Kari is a former advisor of managing director of NEFCO. And Kari has lots of experience by working in the Baltics, Poland, Russia. So he has lots of experience working in our region. And my first question to you, so how would you see how the political risk or political life has developed during the years, how it's influenced our lives, and how it's influencing infrastructure project development? So maybe a little more broader view from you, Kari.
Okay, thank you. Maybe just say a couple of words of Nordic Environmental Finance Corporation, because I'm almost sure that very few know what this organization is all about. It's a small fund owned by the Nordic governments. And one which is very specific, we do only projects which have environmental benefits. Many of those projects are infrastructure projects, but they are also various other types of projects. And we can do public and private investments. When we have this environment mandate, it means actually that our operations and success and investments are driven by the environmental regulation or the environmental incentives like green tariffs. So these are two things which have been mostly driving our operations rather than kind of economic development as such, of course, and politics. Of course, politics, all these decisions are made by the politicians. And we have a very specific geographical mandate. We were originally only allowed to work close to the Baltic Sea area. So basically Russia, Baltic states, Poland were the first ones some 20 years back, and we were very active in the Baltics. In all these countries, we still have investments here, and we are here now again through BaltCap, but we had many years when we didn't do any new projects. But then what happened, which was also politics and had a huge impact on us, you guys joined EU, and we were not anymore needed. There was a lot of money coming from the EU, and we phased out ourselves. At the same time, when we came back 3 years ago, we went back also to Poland, where we were very hopeful to get a major environmental portfolio through basically renewable energy. Then Poland had an elections and coal was up again, and we had invested quite a lot in a number of project preparations with private sector, and we don't see them coming up yet. When we had left the Baltics, it was Russia, and Russia, of course, has always been a major challenge in many aspects. In the early days, one lesson learned of the politics was that when you do public sector projects in municipalities, make sure that the mayor and the governor from the region are from the same party. It was no go if they came from the different party. There was no possibility to put the project forward. Well, a few years back that was solved. There is always basically the mayor and the governor are from the same party. Unfortunately, then some other events took place, again politics, and we are not thrown out of the country or voluntary leaving the country like many other IFIs have done. We can do still small projects in Russia, but there is no demand at today. We might get something happening on the climate change issues. On the other hand, this has been a major change in our portfolio build-up. Ukraine is now our biggest customer. We started with energy efficiency and district heating projects where energy efficiency is the key issue. But today, it's basically renewables. We have a number of projects under preparation and being signed already in wind and solar projects. So these have all kind of had two dimensions, the environment and the certain politics which have been driving us. We are today also working globally, but I think this is the things I wanted to mention. What is important is that the world is changing every day. So in a way, it's good to learn from your experience and put the things in place and your processes that you can address the changes which are coming always.
Okay, thank you, Kari. Now we'd like to approach to Giedrius Ruškys, who is a loan officer at European Investment Bank. And Giedrius, maybe you could share some of your experience as you're investing in quite a wide region in different infrastructure projects. So maybe some kind of concrete examples, what you see as a good ones, maybe these which can be improved, and what kind of the concrete, maybe suggestions you have to policymakers, to local policymakers, to local policy implementers. So what is your experience and view towards political risk and implementing infrastructure projects?
Thank you. So first of all, when we talk about political risk in the Baltic countries, let's say what we mean by this, because of course those are EU countries, we do not have like risk of expropriation or currency conversion, which you face in other countries, like in Africa or some other continents. But of course, there is the key issue what we face in these countries is first regulatory risk and change in law risk, especially if there is some retroactive changes in law. And then the other key risk is basically the public sector decides to breach, to cancel the contract or to breach the, let's say, concession agreement or something. And of course, I myself work more with debt financing, like like providing loans. And of course, this regulatory risk, if we work in the sectors which has a regulatory element, like renewable sector or private-public partnerships, there is this element of political risk, and of course we need to evaluate it, and our credit people look at it, and from legal perspective. And unfortunately, I would not link only that to current elections or former elections. We have some negative examples in Baltic countries where there is some retroactive changes or attempts to retroactively change the regulatory framework. So one example is in Latvia, when they suddenly decided to reconsider the existing regulatory regime and retroactively to cancel support or to reduce it dramatically. So of course, when we look at it and basically we cannot do the project anymore. So we stop, and this is like the worst case scenario what could happen, that you cannot even proceed with the project. Of course, the lower impact could be that you still accept that political risk and you just increase the price, but then for both for public sector and private sector, it becomes more costly to proceed with the project. If we have PPP type of project, like road PPP or some different like social infrastructure, of course we have the agreement where you can mitigate that risk. You have termination clauses, you have compensation on termination, you have change in law clause, you can agree what will happen if there is a change in law, you can agree even specific caps if until certain amount that the government will be responsible or it will be private sector risk. But the problem is that the government can simply do not obey these agreements, and we have, I think, in Lithuania some examples. It's like, okay, it's concession based, they will just say, okay, we are not going to pay you anymore. It was in Kaunas, if I remember that. And then what to do? And then we have examples also which regarding new law CHP plans in Lithuania, it's like retroactive change introduced recently in Lithuania. So there are many examples, and of course, these are bad examples from politicians' point of view, from our point of view, and the politicians should not do like this. But the region is not unique. We have seen those retroactive changes in Czech Republic, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, even Western Europe like Spain, etc., etc. And of course, the impact is that investors is scared for a long time, when it's very difficult to attract them again to the market. And the advice is just to have a stable regulatory framework and do not do retroactive changes affecting the current projects.
Yeah, thank you, Giedrius. And now maybe I would turn to Elena Kiseleva, who, as we discussed during coffee break, we can even say Yelena Kiseleva here, and everyone would understand the same. So Yelena is the principal banker of EBRD, and she is more concentrating and focusing on the transportation projects. So Yelena, from your side, could you give some kind of concrete mitigation type of the actions which public representative, government representative could do in order to implement transportation projects more successfully and could attract more investments from institutional investors like you?
Yeah, I'd say that my message would probably be similar to what Giedrius just said. Infrastructure is a public good, and even while welcoming international or private investors, the government tends to retain certain significant control over infrastructure assets. For example, in case of public-private partnerships, the government would normally keep the right to terminate the concession for no reason basis unilaterally. The government also keeps control of the regulatory framework, often of tariff setting mechanisms, and it's therefore important for long-term investors to address this potential risk, and this risk is usually addressed in the concession agreement. So for example, the termination payment in the concession agreement should cover all the expected returns at the tender stage. the significant adverse changes in the regulatory framework should trigger certain compensation events. Of course, it is not ideal because compensation events are often subject to discussions and negotiations, but still it is better than in case of the pure equity investments. In our experience in the transport infrastructure sectors, we have actually a positive experience because we have some PPPs in our portfolio who's been there since late 90s or early 2000s and survived government changes in Hungary, and they're still there, they're still going, and we have made additional investments, which probably indicates that in certain project structures, the political risk can be mitigated successfully. I'd say that we, however, hear from that in other sectors, in renewable energy, in the energy sectors, there is a real threat of change of regulatory environment in the Baltics. There's something that happened in Poland when the government retroactively changed the law, which reduced the revenue of the companies. And all the sections, they increase the perception of political risks and create a certain unwelcoming environment for the private investors. It's important for the government to recognize the effect that political risks may make on the private investors, and it's important to recognize their right to basically for appropriate compensation in case of any changes of framework.
Thank you, Elena. And now, if Yanis, to go more to the local perspective, and actually what Giedrius was mentioned a few minutes ago, I think both of us can recognize some decisions from the government institutions that you have long-term agreements to finance pension system and pension fund accumulation funds, but somehow in some moments premiums are almost disappearing or decreased by significantly, which also brings some kind of risks to our business. But now, if to look from your perspective as investor into Latvia, as investor in the Baltics, so how do you see the perspective of the infrastructure fund developments? What kind of risk you see here in the market, and do you see you have some kind of more bright future, or it's still some kind of risk which not allowing to increase allocations into local economies?
Well, I'm an optimist by nature, so I think the infrastructure investing in the Baltics is only in its very early stages at the moment. But speaking of from a practitioner's point of view, what are the issues that we constantly face? And it has to do not only with infrastructure investments, but I would say that with illiquid long-term investments in general. There is a major gap between, let's say, the wish to develop long-term investments and the regulation. For example, the ministry responsible for regulating pension funds in each of the countries does not necessarily talk to the Ministry of the Economy, so the legal structures being set up are not appropriate for pension funds as investors. For example, if we are restricted either by law or by regulations from our local FSA from actually using some of the good investment ideas and developing them. So this is a very typical situation that we face.
So I would say very familiar topics and ideas, which actually we have more or less the same in Lithuania. So,
yep. Well, one additional thing that I would like to draw everyone's attention to is also what also scares us as investors is persistent talk about pension reforms, etc. Because how can you make long-term investment decisions if you cannot be sure that the current setup of the system is going to be around for a decent amount of time?
Yeah, thank you, Yanis. As our time is running and still we have 6-7 minutes for our discussion, so maybe I would like a little bit to switch to another topic which is also, I believe, quite important in all our agendas. This is sustainability, green finance issues, and maybe just a couple of words from you. So how do you see that sustainability, green financing, and these environmental issues could be like integrated into infrastructure projects? Do you see, maybe you have some kind of real examples of it? And do you see this would be some kind of benefit for the countries on attracting institutional investors' money or not, to have in agenda these projects with a long-term, sustainable green finance and have this element which helps not only, or say, which in general helps for the society to live better life. Yeah, so Kari, maybe from you as you expert in investing in green financing project.
Yeah, obviously we are living on that we are building for ourselves a better environment. So from that perspective, I think the world has changed over the past 10 years or so. I have been working with NEFCO, that now it is a daily discussion, even with the politicians and everybody. So it's a kind of given fact. But what I want to bring up here was about part of this question is that the corporate governance and transparency, which I would say that we're quite late on that. We actually, in a way, we believe that, okay, we are doing small environment projects, there cannot be any that kind of problems, but actually the biggest loss we made a few years back was if we would do that project today, we would have done a due diligence on the company. That was a private sector project, and we would have found out the issues which eventually then drove the project in the trouble and bankruptcy. But this is also the same thing in the public sector, where actually we haven't faced that type of losses, but without having the integrity, due diligence, and transparency issues sorted out up front, what we have done is that at the last minute, project has been fully prepared. We are almost first contracts going out, and then we realize that the key person is actually to be prosecuted next week. So basically, this is something, and this is the reputational risk, which is then, as we read nowadays daily, is really making huge impact in the investor's life.
And Giedrius, where's the Baltic standing with implementing sustainability-related projects comparing with the Central Eastern Europe, for example? Are we advanced or we are behind? Online?
I cannot say like comparing the whole universe of Baltic projects with the whole universe of the Central Eastern Europe. But the projects which we evaluate, because we are EU bank, and of course we living in this corporate social responsibility world at the moment, and all institutions are very aware of this, and it is very important for everyone. So we follow EU rules. So regarding environmental standards, regarding social standards, we look at the EU regulations. So, and as we do myself business in EU countries, so I do not really see very much difference, because all those countries need to follow the same regulations, and if they follow these, so I mean, then it's fine to finance that project and to go forward. So I wouldn't say that there is very huge difference between different countries.
Okay, thanks. And then Elena, moving towards you, so green transportation, green green moving instruments and ideas. I think this is an area where you are strong in as EBRD and as investor, or I'm wrong?
Well, yes, I mean, you're probably asking the right person because among the IFIs we have the highest, probably one of the highest target for green investments. It should be 40% of our investment. And yes, we do support, there are green components, you can find green components almost in any form of transport. So the most common green transport is railways, and the railways is not is producing the lowest carbon footprint, and we see a lot of investment coming in the sector. So hopefully, once Rail Baltica is there up and running, this will increase even further. Buildings such as airports, logistics centers are also continuing to becoming more and more energy efficient, and ultimately they have tendency to become, they hopefully will become self-sufficient in terms of energy. The roads that reduce congestion also can be considered as a green transport. But also there are solutions that make roads or ports more resilient in the face of natural disasters. The other big topic in the green transportation is use of electric vehicles, and it's not just trucks and cars, but also one of our clients in Turkey produces electric ferries. But it's important to note also that the green investments are not just have sustainable aspect. They also reduce and improve the life cycle operation costs.
Okay, thank you. And as Geert said that now he's following time very much, so we are now in the very end of the discussion, but still, Yanis, would be interesting to hear your view from this local perspective. So if infrastructure projects do not have any sustainability policy, or it will not influence the sustainability as such, so can this project still get investments from you? It's already only these who are sustainable projects are in the pipeline?
Well, actually, it just might, and let me explain why. Historically, of course, in investment policies for, let's say, fund managers like ourselves, we start out with exclusion lists, where we don't invest in non-ESG compliant industries and companies, etc. But that's step one. Now we're moving ahead, because that's kind of considered a given already these days, that we all follow these sorts of principles. So what's the next step? Actually, to become activist investors, meaning to be proactive and bring our own ideas about how each project should be run, etc. So I would say we wouldn't necessarily exclude such an investment from our list of options, but rather, if we decide to invest, we would be active.
But it would get more points in your due diligence process if it has sustainability factors.
Certainly, it does help. Yes.
And very, very finally, do you have any question from the audience?
I actually wanted to raise a little bit more the issue. I think this Monday, the report just came out, which basically said that 2% of global warming, we are sort of facing this in near future, will basically mean unsustainable living for millions or billions of people. So you just said that maybe you would invest in sustainable or less sustainable projects, but is that enough anymore to do? Because one thing is for us old people, but what we will leave for our children. because then it starts to impact immediately all other projects. The heat that was this summer, you would see droughts even in our Baltic region. You would see heats in city centers. You would have seen also stoppage of construction work, etc. I mean, it starts to impact regularly now. Is that enough? And do you see any policy changes that actually you, as you said, active investor, already starting to push through? Because in 10 years' time, maybe the projects will fail just because of climate change.
Just to whom to address the question, maybe I a little bit comment, and maybe Kari, I would give word to you. So I think how we are looking from the pension management perspective, pension fund management perspective. So I think this is the only one instrument which we have in hands in order to try to influence our societies. So what we are talking with and what Yanis told, that I believe that we have already the rules in our strategies that we invest locally in the local projects which contribute to better environmental changes, to higher sustainability levels. So this is already more or less as a must to have for the companies and for the projects. So this is one instrument which we have in hands, and I believe we are trying to influence it and trying to implement it. Is it enough? At least it's the start of the discussions, and maybe Kari can comment more as you have a longer experience in financing different green projects.
Well, I mean, I'm not actually the right person to answer, because our statutes, our operations, everything, it has been changing from cleaning the Baltic Sea to saving the world. I mean, we are doing almost only climate projects today. So basically, we are not the cannot give advice to the other investors how they see. But as we all know, it's not only the investors. There is a political willingness which is missing from reaching the below 2 degrees climate warming. So, but I assume every investor is already adapting within the limits they can have. But that's not what we cannot do more.
Any further comments? Or?
EIB, the biggest.
No, I mean, of course we have policies and we have business objectives that set in, I don't know now exactly which percentage of our all operations needs to be devoted to climate action. But of course it cannot be 100%, because we need some other projects like road projects, which by default it's not sustainable because the polluting cars are using it. So we are trying to do as much as possible environmental friendly projects and of course sustainable projects, but certain amount of investments which still need to be done does not necessarily meet that criteria, like road financing or some other sectors. Yeah.
So I believe we touched the topic. So if there are one more question, we see if we still have time. Or?
Do you have the microphone, or you could just...
My name is Adam Ostrowski. I'm from Warsaw. Listening to this conversation, we come to this environmental issue. And we talk about this energy efficiency project, about sustainability. And the new term, which will arrive in 2016, which is now discussed, is, maybe you heard, is a circular economy. And this is, this is the, one of the idea which relate not only to globally. This is, the idea which is driven to maintain any product as long as possible in the life of the product circle life. And the waste we produce shouldn't be treated as a waste. It should be treated as a product for the to use as a energy sources, to use not to create the waste. I think this is also this is the different philosophy, how to look at this say a problem with our climate changes. Also, because we, at one side, we're looking for the cleaning environment. The second, we need also to develop. How to develop? We should to combine, these two challenges.
Yanis, maybe.
Yeah, I guess the topic you touch upon, there's no easy answer to this. All I can say is, I guess, anytime we look at a particular investment case, it's a question of finding the right balance in it between the sustainability and business aspects of it.
Yeah, I think that was a very, very valid question. Although focus today is looking at the CO2 emissions quickly, how to be able to reach that level that it would be sustainable. But there is a lot of research made on the circular economy, I think, in all Nordic countries and elsewhere. We have some circular economy projects already in the pipeline. We try to look at because often these ideas come from startup companies, actually, how to utilize the former waste into producing something new. So it is very important, and is having more and more attention, both at the also politics. I come from Finland, and Finland hopes to be one of the political agenda is to become the circular economy, the model country of that, but it remains to be seen.
I would say that in the Baltics, for sure, there's still plenty to do in very simple things like recycling, where we are way behind the Nordics.
Yeah. And maybe Lena, you?
Yeah, as an I5 that is supporting green investments, we also encourage introduction of green technologies in our project. And when we are doing the new projects, which implies new construction, we also try to conduct energy audits and try to mobilize grants to introduce the components that are more energy efficient.
Yeah, and maybe just a little bit to summarizing. So I believe that any of us, like investors or representing our institutions, we would do due diligence really carefully and with a big interest of such type of the project as you described, which is involved in the circular economy. But I believe, and say the same as Yanis said, I think we need to still do lots of steps in order to reach this discussions about cycle economy. So I believe we are ready to invest. We would be ready to evaluate such investment opportunities in such a project, but it's again coming back, it's political decisions. If politicians would see this as some kind of advantages in their political agenda to go in this direction, I believe they would have the support and more possibilities to attract institutional investors' money in such type of the project. Right.
Yes.
Any more maybe questions? Or?
If no questions, then I would like to say thank you for the good panel. And Jānis Rozenfelds, Kari Homanen, Giedrius Ruškis, Jelena Kisiljova, and Tadas Gudaitis. Let's give a round of applause. Thank you.